folks are from Columbia, South Carolina. They're here tonight with a song from their self-titled debut album. Let's give a great welcome to Crossfade.
What I really meant to say.
Performing from their latest CD, 1X, please welcome 3 Days Grace.
The Juno goes to...
Come on, man!
Nickelback.
Yeah!
3 Doors Down.
Wow.
Limp Bizkit.
Some hard competition right there.
Behind the music that sucks.
Wow.
To their global success in rock and roll, please welcome multi-platinum recording artist, 3 Doors Down.
How did we get here? Let's backtrack to the year 1998. The economy was the most stable that has been in the decade, even though we were starting to slowly see the canopy feeders take a stab at undermining the roots that held their forest together. The late 90s became the period of complacency. You can see this disparity in the movies of the time. Your younger cousin's favorite movie, Fight Club, showed how a group can rally behind a figure who embraces disorder just to inject a bit of meaning in their lives. So, how did we get to this point? Well, after America beat their rivals, the Soviet Union, they were clamoring for a new foe. Conflict is a necessary part of nature, and our conflict with our Soviet silly llamas? Our conflict with our Soviet silly llamas led to some of our biggest innovations. Americans metaphorically began to twiddle their thumbs as a result of this loss of conflict. Okay, so wait, what about the music, you may ask? This is a video about butt rock, not a B-grade knowledge hub video. Okay, C-grade at best. Well, I for one believe that the surroundings and cultural background is integral to the eventual rise of butt rock. But yeah, you're right. Let's look at the charts. Let's see what came out in 1998. In terms of crossing over the boundaries into the pop charts, there's not much activity. The mid-90s projected at least Bush to have a crossover hit, but they were touring around to sell out crowds and doing it pretty comfortably. The Hearthstone Candlebox were predictably done with their 15 minutes, and I like to think they all got jobs at a Yankee candle shop. Godsmack also released their eponymous debut, which is really funny when you realize the album came out 2 years after the release of Alice in Chains' Tripod album. And yes, if you want to know who I think is the least original butt rock band, it is Godsmack, by a wide margin.
Nope.
So we see butt rock starting to weave its way into the echelon of rock. But there are a few adversaries. So what was butt rock competing with in 1998? 2 words. Adult alternative. And man, if this somehow becomes a series, you know I'm going to cover this wretched genre. I actually consider adult alternative the coffeehouse version of butt rock. I mean, Matchbox 20? Goo Goo Dolls? Give butt rock all the shit you want, but at least their music has some gusto to it. So yeah, Stain signed with Flip Records based on Fred Durst's recommendation. He's basically the George Clinton of butt rock, if you didn't know. And as I said on Tuesday, Creed and Nickelback are starting to gain some serious momentum. Before we trudge on with this period of apathy and BuzzFeed ideas, I have to mention an event that happened that started to turn the wheels of phasing out controversial music in the last days of the radio age. Columbine was a shocking incident. It was the first time that the reality of minors taking out an orchestrated killing came into the fold. Because of the avoidant nature of our culture, we try to find everything to blame without taking these issues head on. Just like we need conflict, we need somewhere to direct our shock. On May 4th, 1999, 380 days after the tragedy, the US Senate held a hearing outright criticizing the role that so-called violent music plays in youth. While only the obvious scapegoats of Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails were mentioned, it wasn't the first time the Senate had issues with the music that young people were listening to. This was the first time, though, that through very, again, I can't express this enough, very intense mental jumping jacks, that they had actual air quotes proof of the damage that this music can do. The amount of time spent missing the point would make Ben Shapiro blush. For your pleasure, I'll just add these quotes here. You guys having fun yet? I sure am. So, back to where we were. So yeah, Woodstock 99, that was a mess. And this is where the seeds of butt rock began to set. Staind releases their first major label record. This butt rock was a little bit different from the butt rock of yesteryear. While Bush and Candlebox represented a divergence from the grunge that inspired it, there was still a shimmer of grittiness that sat in the songs, from a lyrical and production standpoint. This music was a bit different. It was cleaner and more transparent. The half-dodging of Everything Zen was replaced by the bombastic layaways brought by Staind's Mud Shovel. This was an awakening for rock fans who were stuck between being scared of the repercussions of Nine Inch Nails and the pansy-popping nature of Goo Goo Dolls. And yes, the moment we've all been waiting for. The first breakthrough release from one of our premium butt rock bands. No, the Creed the band, not the... So in the fall of 1999, Human Clay was released, and it was a hit. Lead single Higher made it as high as number 7 on the top 100, like the Hot 100, like the pop chart in 2000. The thing about butt rock is that there are multiple albums that you can point to as the pinnacle album, and this was one of them. Hit singles like What If and With Arms Wide Open guaranteed Creed spots to play halftime shows for at least the next half decade. And yes, I would be begrudged not to show this video.
Can you take me higher to a place where blind man sees?
Masculine entertainment such as WWE and the NFL started to take off in the late 90s. With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a desire to find characters of conflict elsewhere, whether it be the Dallas Cowboys or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. What better music to accompany such canned vitriol as the ultimate music of displaced anger and radical bar riffs? In my research, many people mentioned that they discovered a lot of these bands throughout these mediums. And you can see many of butt rock on various WWE and Madden video game soundtracks. It is also frustrating that there is a gross misrepresentation of butt rock in Guitar Hero games. Like, come on, there are some genuinely interesting songs that you could have put, but instead you put Shout at the Devil or Heart-Shaped Box? Really? 2000 saw America start to really lose its shit. Unsurprisingly, butt rock was revving into what I like to call its renaissance. While there were nostalgia acts such as Red Hot Chili Peppers and AC/DC finding success, about 24% of the top 100 rock chart belonged to nothing but butt rock. We see Lifehouse gaining a lot of success, which brings us to a segment that I scrapped. No, they're not butt rock. They're adult alternative.
Nope.
Butt rock bands are rising to unprecedented heights out of nowhere. 3 doors down, but you can't ignore the fact that their first release spawned 3 hits. Limp Bizkit did the theme for Mission Impossible, which almost sounds as absurd as Migos doing the next James Bond soundtrack, which I could also see happening. Butt rock is synonymous for its arena appeal, and nothing exemplifies this more than by the amount of arenas that were popping up around the mid-90s and early 2000s, with 2003 alone seeing the construction of 20 arenas. These high-capacity venues fit the bill, as they are more about the theatrics and presentation than the sound and intimacy. Butt rock bands embrace the arena, feeding off the crowd energy. Very similar to the glam of the 1980s, butt rock was all about the showmanship. Must we go back to the Thanksgiving halftime show? These shows were produced like a super church on steroids, an artificial spiritual, if you will. While one can see these shows as fake and disingenuous, there were droves of people who saw this as ethereal. You could spend 2 weeks of work on one of these shows to have a story of a lifetime. Now, this wasn't always the case.
Have we got any Nickelback fans in Portugal? Are you sure? Up to you. You guys want to hear some rock and roll or you want to go home?
The music and shows provided a level of comfort for the everyman. It was a celebration of freedom and expression. Okay, so last bummer history moment that does tie into butt rock, I'll get to in a second. So just bear with me. So one of the most trying days for an American happened on 9/11/2001. I don't feel like going over the tragedy, as everyone watching this video know the events all too well. Then why am I bringing it up, you ask? Well, because in my opinion, this day was a turning point in butt rock. Is it a coincidence that Nickelback's magnum opus, Silver Side Up, was released on the same day? After these events, the world just sort of shut down. People didn't know how to react, as paranoia ruled the media. Everyone just needed a distraction. And what better way than to sing songs about ambiguous heartbreaks and neglected feelings? Not feelings of neglect, neglected feelings. It almost felt like a throwback to those now sought-after times of complacency in the late 90s. The overall inoffensiveness and playful nature of butt rock also helped when those arguments made about the damaging effects of controversial music were put to rest, as labels and radio stations avoided any controversy and dissonance like the plague after these events. Clear Channel released their now infamous list of banned radio songs, and it did include Rollin' by Limp Bizkit and Duck and Run by Three Doors Down. And even though all these songs on this list were tied together by themes of war or flight, there was a clear fear of any songs that portrayed outward negativity. This is how we get the popularity of How You Remind Me. If Kryptonite was Michelangelo's Battle of the Centaurs, then How You Remind Me was Nickelback's The Last Supper. This song was huge, and for good fucking reason. It rules. And don't give me that shit about Chad Kroeger using pop conventions or whatever to write the song. You're seriously going to complain because he wanted the song to be good? Look, I understand being mad that they released something made blatantly to be liked on the beloved Roadrunner label, and that signified a turning point in their history. But just listen to the intro. The power instilled in those guitars. His melodies are impeccable. So please, if you want to hate the song because Kroeger practiced honesty in saying that he wrote it with the intention of being a lead single, then you are so welcome to join the boycott of all pop music. I'm sure they'll be fine with you listening to your Silver Apples and Merzbows. The rest of the early 2000s was smooth sailing for our hero butt rocks. While they did have to share billboard space with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and various eventually forgotten pop punk acts, they pretty much had a monopoly on the rock scene. And biggest hit of 2002? Yeah, you could say this genre was doing well. Creed's 2001 effort, Weathered, was another strong album in the laurels of butt rockdemonium. Peaking at yes, you heard that right, number 1 on the US Billboard 100. Maybe it was just the memories that the Bulls video etched into the minds of the average viewer, not knowing that they were witnessing the demo for the soon-to-be biggest MMORPG. And yeah, that album cover was something to behold. Some can say the success of butt rock of this time is attributed to the snowball effect of label support for tightly controlled rock music. But listening to butt rock of this time reveals something else to me. This music sounds powerful. It is power. It's music that you want to take your personal frustrations out on. It's impossible to feel small while listening to it. It emphasizes forward progression while wading in still waters. While the late 90s represented a time of searching for meaning, post 9/11 culture found its meaning, and this was the soundtrack for that movement. Alpha Media released a video about a year ago on color theory and music, and I believe that butt rock is a combination of silver and red, with its slick production combined with its unrelenting emotion and on-the-run type of lyrical content. So when I think of 2003, I think of the invasion of Iraq and the start of the bling era of all things. In my opinion, it's when American culture was getting dominated by the corporate sponsorship that the late 90s were warning us about. The Napster lawsuit, which saw butt rock latecomers Metallica getting mad at the lack of regulation and control that the internet created in regards to their music, also begins to take place. See, bands like Metallica and Nickelback's main benefit from suppressing Napster is that it gives them control over their music and allows a more streamlined delivery of their songs. The original distribution model favors the ones who have the means of production, as the general public seemingly only has access to bands that are signed to a major distributor such as Atlantic or EMI. Yeah, while it may be true you could discover smaller bands, typically that requires going to a stinky local venue and hitting up their merch table, just to find out that the band is selling their CDs for $25 a pop, which in 2003 money is not cheap. Some bands rode the wave and discovered the potential of Napster, such as the always forward-thinking Limp Bizkit. Most bands didn't want to think that their music was out of their control, and that listeners were finding it easier and easier to discover music outside of what they hear on the radio or see in their CD warehouses. So, although Metallica won the lawsuit, it was not the end of music streaming and P2P file sharing. This was the beginning of the end for butt rock. Several acts such as Puddle of Mudd and Nickelback saw releases in 2003 that received admirable attention, but didn't really receive the same airtime as their previous two releases respectively. Not the same way Creed saw success for Weathered or that Three Doors Down saw for Away from the Sun. And this is because a lot of butt rock was saturating the airwaves at this time. Even Fuel, a band I should have talked about as being a progenitor alongside Bush and Candlebox, was seeing sustained success. Butt rock was winning the war in quantity, but the general excitement was starting to shift. As the 2000s went on, we saw some mystifying cultural trends. The rise of third wave emo bands such as My Chemical Romance and Panic! At the Disco ushered in a wave of the next malign genre, the hot topic emo. And butt rock kind of adapted. Seether and Breaking Benjamin took a darker route in their next releases, and you saw the rise of butt rock emo such as 3 Days Grace and Shinedown. Shinedown. Probably the second biggest butt rock meme behind Nickelback. You also saw bad boy bands with a soft side, such as Hinder and Buckcherry, that reminisced of bands like Poison and Skid Row. Butt rock was adapting, and its staying power was getting to a point where it could span generations. Maybe the most influential bands of the 2020s will pick up a Theory of a Dead Man or Rev Theory record and want to imitate what they are doing, but they'll use their peripheral influences to transform the work while keeping the ethos alive. This is how you have a band like Oasis 25 years after the Beatles released their last album. It's how you have Greta Van Fleet. Butt rock was slowly making its cultural imprint and cementing its status in the royalty of rock legend, harkening back to the days of Elvis. Butt rock was one more smash release away, and it never came. 2006! Well, another strong year for butt rock was the middle of the end. 4 boys from Sheffield began posting songs on the site as both were gaining popularity. Just as an African oxpecker feeds off the ticks of the giraffe, Myspace was a platform for otherwise unknown bands to gain notoriety while promoting this site that allowed you to share cat photos and these videos on this other little-known site called YouTube. Whatever people say I am, That's What I'm Not was a smash hit and completely changed the game. And then we had 5 other chaps from Oxford who self-released their album a year later, and this meant the landscape was changing. Labels knew they couldn't just shill out the same band with a new face. People were sick of hearing Photograph and finally felt like they had a choice of what they were listening to. Napster and iTunes were tuning themselves up and began a model of a virtual market that put the control in the ears of the listener. The world was moving at a rapidly ascending pace, and an illusion of progress was starting to take place for our butt rock heroes. With the saturation of bands came a divvying of the success. Limp Bizkit was in the midst of a hiatus. Dark Horse sold about 1/3 of the copies as For All the Right Reasons, and Cross faded out of existence. There was simply no need for butt rock. It was around this time that the public started to show major disdain for the bands that once brought so much joy and reprieve to the masses. Early photo edits characterized a culturally understood hatred of this genre, especially Nickelback. Nickelback was the easy target as they were the most visible and wore all the tropes on their sleeves as it was a sense of pride for them. Patrick Carney, you know, the guy who drums for the band that makes music for Chevy commercials, was on record saying that rock music was dead because people became okay with letting a band like Nickelback become the biggest band of all time, at the time. And he was right, to an extent. Rock and roll was dying. But was it the fault of Nickelback and company? And this is where we come to the crux of this series.
It's just one of those days!
What is it about butt rock that garners so much hate? Why, out of all trends in rock music, does this get the most unfettered ridicule?
My friends that are super cool despise Nickelback.
It's like if the Beatles were produced by Nickelback. It's music, but it sucks.
It talks about the studies that show that bad music makes people violent. Like Nickelback makes me want to kill Nickelback.
You may say that the answer is obvious because, well, it sucks. And yeah, fair enough, that's an easy answer to use, but that's just like your opinion, man. AC/DC also sucks, according to a lot of people, and their drummer killed someone. Sleeping with Sirens sucks, but it isn't a nationally recognized joke to shit on them. No, this answer goes deeper, and I'm going to have to use everything I've learned so far to explain.
Just say no to butt rock.
The Triforce of Suckage is Limp Bizkit created Nickelback.
Why does everybody hate Nickelback?
All of this. Oh, thank you, Sasha Geffen. Yeah, I remember when I said I was going to reference this article a lot. Well, let's just say this is the time to do it. Butt rock's biggest problem is timing. No, seriously, hear me out here. The second wave came at a time when the world was exposed to the realm of underground music in a way never seen before since the RIAA was founded. The future seemed bright for the greater good of musical exploration and what had the ability to become popular. Now, this wasn't the first time more non-conventional music became popular. We had David Bowie, who was a symbol for being able to freely experiment while creating hit records. With butt rock came a digression. Suddenly, music went from the hands of the listeners back to the hands of the label. We went from Nirvana to Nickelback, Flaming Lips to Theory of a Dead Man. We were given figures that seemed relatable and down to earth, and in the blink of an eye, saw them turn to these brooding dude bros that spewed out the same nonsense we thought we were over with back in 1991. Except this time, they had the audacity to imitate those that they have triumphed over. It's like killing someone, assuming their identity, and then making a lot of money because the guy he killed just invented the internet. Or, as Sasha Geffen more eloquently puts it, these bands pissed off people with taste by dressing up in Nirvana's gruffness while hollowing out their strangeness. Everything sounded the same. If familiarity breeds contempt, then overexposure leads to absolute hatred. It's easy to hate something when it surrounds you. Just ask me whenever a song becomes popular. I find it fitting when I see ads like this.
There are no good Nickelback songs.
Because it represents what killed butt rock. The internet. The memes and the pages such as, "Can this pickle get more likes than Nickelback?" represented a rebellion from those who had to long suffer the exposure of butt rock without any sort of voice to combat it. It was a way of delegitimizing the record industry, and telling them that shilling the same voice with a new face isn't going to fly when we are given the ability to discover music more freely without relying on brick and mortar stores or the radio to tell us what to listen to. And the pickle represents the weirdness that we're all too afraid to express. It's easy to forget that maybe you once found the song catchy, or that this album got you through the 7th grade. We have all had a band or album that we look back on in shame because it represents what we didn't like about ourselves. Maybe you heard that Skillet song in that hockey video game and spent the entire day listening to it, analyzing the lyrics and telling your parents why you liked it. Some things you grow out of. It doesn't help when you see people who didn't grow out of that phase and they think wearing studded jeans and metal bracelets are still in vogue. There is another problem that I have not mentioned once this week. Where were the women in butt rock? Unless you count Evanescence, which I don't, there are virtually no women in this genre. Edit. I did find one band with a female lead singer, and they are Flatleaf, and they absolutely shred. To add insult to injury, the amount of chauvinistic remarks and outward exclamations of brohood would make Robert Plant blush. Grunge brought us great symbols of femininity, but here comes butt rock, stomping around, virtually erasing women's role in rock music for a few years. And just another quote from the Sasha Geffen article, because this piece is so well written. These bands took songs that wore signs of femininity and closed them tight inside hypermasculine shells. Butt rock also has this verboseness. I remember when I first heard the song Radioactive by Imagine Dragons and absolutely hating it, because here was a song claiming to be by a rock band who is ditching traditional rock instrumentals for dubstep, wahs, and doos. The song is about how people who aren't ready for the eventual synthesis in rock and how they just have to accept the fact that this is the new reality. But rock has the same ego when it comes to their music. Except, instead of welcoming in the new age, they're desperately making a run for taking from the past and regurgitating it as long as people are buying. The initial hate may have started because butt rock represented the last hurrah for rock in the mainstream. Now with the internet basically letting us curate our exposure to certain groups, and the idea of the mainstream dwindling, this doesn't seem that big of a deal right now. But go back to 2013, and you had kids like me lamenting the fall of rock and the lack of easily accessible bands that weren't Queens of the Stone Age or Foo Fighters. Was this butt rock's fault? Maybe. The mainstream seemed to have lost trust in rock's ability to maintain accessibility while bringing new ideas to the table. And yes, I would be crazy not to bring up the ultra-conservatism that comes with the music. The music spoke to the blue collar, at a time when the blue collar had everything they seemingly wanted. Everybody was waving the American flag in the early 2000s. Our president was a white dude from Texas whose dad was the last bastion of conservatism in the White House before him. Butt rock was an exclamation point for the right wing. Is it any coincidence that butt rock's influence started to dwindle in 2008? The resulting hate we saw in the early 2010s was merely a snowball effect. It was cool to hate butt rock. Every sect of music listener could come together and unite on their hatred. Really goes hand in hand for the groupthink concepts that these so-called forward thinkers were putting themselves into. Even the Department of Defense joined in on the hate, citing 2 butt rock bands as banned music in their offices.
It's a band photo.
Of who? Which band?
Us, it's a band photo.
They have our band photo up there?
We're banned.
And the Department of Defense knows their music. In fact, the guy who designed our missile defense system also played the solo on Reelin' in the Years. Look it up, kids. And the last point I want to mention is butt rock isn't helping its case these recent years. With 3 Doors Down being one of the horsemen of the apocalypse by playing at Donald Trump's inauguration, Fred Durst got into directing, and
I can't talk too long. I gotta poo.
Let's just say his strength is still rapping. None of these artists really proved themselves to be more than what we already thought of them. Puddle of Mudd's recent release and debut of Mudfest proves that they are still stuck in the past. Scott Stapp can't stop getting DUIs, and Nickelback seems to be content in the formula that made them break through the top 40. But how about instead of counting all of the supposed musical sins butt rock has committed, focus on what butt rock provides. It's goofy ass music.
Me. This is how you remind me.
While I can't defend the limitless canned angst as Stained, I can't help but revere the voyeuristic masculinity of Nickelback, or the awkward adolescent vapidness of Limp Bizkit. I gotta agree with Dwayne on this one. It is sincerity to a point of self-parody. I totally understand the hate though. I get why you would be sick of seeing this man's face. Or this man's. Or this man's. Or does every butt rock frontman just have the most shit-eating face? I bet you wouldn't hate Puddle of Mudd so much if Wes Scantlin looked like this. One thing that listening to nothing but butt rock has shown me is that when overexposed to one static sound, you tend to go through phases with it. You become fascinated and want to discover everything you can. Then you start growing tired. Then you find a few more things that seemed impossible. Then like mold, it finds a new home and grows. The fatigue turns into bitterness and desperation for something fresh. Your thoughts become consumed with lyrics such as, you grasp for anything resembling a fresh pocket of air until you give up and accept that this is the reality. I can only think of how sweet the air will sound on Monday. So if I could narrow it down to 5 simple points that factor into the hatred of butt rock, this is what I have. It is time for the album review reveal. What album am I reviewing today? It has been the question on everyone's mind that I spoiled on Monday. So yeah, if you were paying any half attention to my video, I kind of forgot to put the effect on that masked out what album it was. So it's For All the Right Reasons by Nickelback. Yeah. No. Let's just skip the intro. This has been such a long day, and I just want to get it over with. On to the review. Part of me hates myself for choosing this as the Nickelback album that I review. It has unarguably some of the most cringe-inducing moments of Nickelbackdom. But at the same time, people do overlook some very tantalizing moments that are sprinkled over this album. Let me give some context. When this album released in 2005, Nickelback had already cemented themselves as one of the biggest bands of the 2000s with their previous 2 albums. What I'm saying is they could have hung everything up and have had a decent legacy. No, they weren't considered to be the most revolutionary band or anything. They were still butt rock through and through, and the seeds of Nickelback hate were being planted.
Back is. I'll have to agree with Nick.
They're not good.
Judy.
But I'm going to say that Without this album, Nickelback doesn't become the most hated band in the world. And upon multiple listens, I find that to be a tragedy. Yes, Photograph is as bad as advertised. And even I won't defend the piss-poor attempt at storytelling that Kroger tries to employ in this song. Savin' Me has some of the worst flow of any charting single that I've ever heard. It's as if they just haphazardly combined parts of Someday and hired Aaron Lewis to fill in the blanks. Yes, the lyrics of Animals and For All the Wrong Reasons are filled with misogyny and cliches that even the writers of Two Broke Girls would scoff at. None of the parts in Far Away feel earned, and the key change harkens back to Be With You by Mr. Big in terms of egregiousness. Suffice it to say, there's a lot to not like about this album. Now, I've spent a lot of time listening to this record, and I want to make this clear. Holistically, it's a pretty so-so album. Might even say it's kind of good. Out of all records I've reviewed, this one is the most divisive. It's funny because I feel like certain cuts on this album were the most fun Nickelback was having making music. I could be wrong. Who knows? Maybe Curb were the salad days and Nickelback really has 100% been phoning it in since Silver Side Up. Honestly, For All the Right Reasons feels like 2 albums. While most butt rock albums' B-cuts are there to take up time and provide filler in between singles, which, trust me, listening to these albums, that is clearly the case. For All the Right Reasons singles are honestly some of the worst songs to come from any of these albums, while songs like Next Contestant and Follow You Home provide some unique flavors that feel like being thrown into a barn during a tornado. I don't know how much say Nickelback gets in what songs are released as singles, but somebody was really afraid to show the world how heavy this album can be. And on top of that, Kroger's vocals soar through these mixes. It makes me mad when people try to accuse him of having that infamous butt rock growl, which yes, he sometimes does. But his voice sounds more like Ronnie Van Zant or Ted Nugent, maybe even with a little more rough around the edges. Look, I know I'm pissing a lot of you off by saying these clearly misinformed statements, but really listen to this album on a good pair of speakers and hear the elegant grit in Chad's voice. And these guitars, don't get me started on these guitars. They are super fucking heavy. I've heard good tone in my day, but these guitars possess a heaviness without feeling overly saturated and like they take the tone through a buzzsaw. I mean, fuck it. These songs were meant for the air guitar. Listen to the awesome arpeggiating leads with the harmonious vocals at the beginning of For All the Wrong Reasons. Just hear how they hit on all cylinders for the chorus. And the way the drums weave through Side of a Bullet, turning it from a thumping bar jam to a filthy disco tribute. Next Contestant is by far my favorite song off the album. I like the idea that Chad is at a bar that his girlfriend works at, and every dude who hits on her is the next contestant to get their ass whooped by Chad Kroger. It gives me very heavy Letterkenny vibes. And you know what? The angelic nature of If Everyone Cared is such a nice slowing point in between some of the heaviest songs on the album. Also, did you know that Ryan and Chad use a Fender Super 60 rack with 6x6 tubes? So yes, for all those complaining about the solid state reliance for tone in modern rock, can look to Nickelback for bucking the trend. And you know what? While I'm at it, Rockstar is a great closing track. It's Nickelback's moment of reflection. And really, isn't that what life is all about? Cheap drugs and loose women. Just kidding. Please don't click off my video. So yeah, I think this album is pretty good. In fact, this is my favorite album so far this week. Yes, there are songs that were released off the album that have been memed to death, and I'm not going to back up, but if you actually listen to this album in full, you're going to find a song that you love. Trust me.
Let me rest. Stop singing! Ah!
I think it's over.